Good evening, gospel revolutionaries around the world. This is Michael Lilborn Williams coming to you live from the bonus room right here in the Secret City. Thank you for joining me tonight. It's a very special night for Mike Williams Ministries and the Gospel Revolution, and for Michael Lilborn Williams too. We'll get more to that in just a few minutes. As we get started, I wanted to share a part of the history of the Gospel Revolution, and it is a part that I began to teach on the healing of the brokenhearted back a couple of decades ago. And the response to that has, honestly, it's spun off into so many people writing books and doing things. It was incredibly impactful in people's lives. Hundreds and even thousands of people lives being affected by this teaching on healing of the brokenhearted. And altar calls, people still to this day attesting that their lives were literally transformed by what happened in some of these sessions. Now, that sounds really good. So not only was I very popular, but I also had a lot of money coming in. So why did I quit? Why did I stop ministering healing to the brokenhearted? Why did I quit something that was making me so incredibly popular? Why did I stop doing something that seemed to be helping so many people? Because it wasn't the gospel. That's the reason I quit, is it just simply was not the gospel. Now, you might say, Mike, what do you mean it wasn't the gospel? Isn't healing the brokenhearted what Jesus came to do? Yes, Jesus did come to heal the brokenhearted. But you see, these verses about healing the brokenhearted come out of Isaiah chapter 61. And here is where we find this profound insight into one of the things that Jesus was going to accomplish at the cross. Now, you see, if it happened at the cross, that means it's done. It's not something for a preacher to pull out of context and go around cultivating a large gathering and doing personal ministry to people because of. That can't be the gospel. It just is not the gospel at all. Now, it doesn't mean that it wasn't good. I mean, there's people that listen to motivational speakers and people that deal with dealing with healing of emotions and things. Got nothing against it whatsoever. The problem is with that, sometimes people wind up going deep within and just never, ever finding a way out. They never find a way to just be themselves and let go of the past. But like I said, the reports that we got, and still to this day, I've talked to people who tell me that these sessions were very impactful and very helpful to them when I would lay hands on them. I remember I put my hands on the sides of their face, and with the compassion that I felt inside and with their need, there were things that happened. But if you're going to talk about healing the brokenhearted, you have to talk about the gospel. Now, the gospel is good news. It's about what did happen. It's not about what will happen. That's not what the gospel is about. The gospel is about what did happen. And healing the brokenhearted is what Jesus did. Now, it's not that he did it and now he's allocating it out to people like myself to go out and minister this healing of brokenhearted. Whatever Jesus accomplished at the cross, it was done. It doesn't give preachers the right to pull these things out of their context and then build a ministry on going about doing these things. I hope that's coming across right. Because I did it, and I made a lot of money doing it, and I gained a whole lot of following by ministering on healing the brokenhearted. It was profoundly successful, an incredible launching point for Mike Williams Ministries and for myself. It really was quite an amazing experience to have. So as I was sitting here the other day, I was watching a series on TV that I enjoy watching, binge watching, And on there they were talking about, somebody was saying, well, you promised not to break my heart. And it's like, yeah, I promised not to break your heart. Well, you promised not to break my heart. So there was this covenant being made between them that they weren't going to break each other's hearts. And so it just brought back this flood of memories to me about this subject of healing the brokenhearted. And so then I had to go get my Bible, and I typed in brokenhearted. And in the Old Testament, of course, it only comes up one time. And I started doing some research in it, and I found out something that I knew was true all along. I just didn't have the words for it at the time. So here's what it says in Isaiah chapter 61. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He hath sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of prisons to them that are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord, and the day of vengeance of our God, and to comfort all that mourn. Now, this is a snapshot of the cross that you'll find many of our friends completely disavow. They don't like they call them the old Jewish scriptures. And they'll tell you just read over any place that says anything about vengeance or wrath or anger or judgment. Well, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to pass up just about every chapter in the Old Testament if you're going to do that. Now, we're going to do a show here in the next little while where we actually take on that challenge, and we take the book of Isaiah. And one of our friends, who's a teacher, said to his listeners, he said, when you come to a part that talks about God being angry or wrathful, he said, just page on. Page on was the way that he put it. So we tried that, and we paged on. Every time we read a chapter that had something about anger, wrath, or judgment in it, we paged on. I've been paging on now for 39 chapters. So the first 39 chapters, according to them, you have to just eliminate altogether out of the Hebrew Scriptures. I have a higher opinion of the Hebrew Scriptures than Mirror Bible, Andre Rabe, or also Global Grace. I have a much higher opinion of the Scriptures than what they have. In fact, they just totally will tell you that they got it all wrong. It's all wrong. It's all wrong. Moses got it wrong. And it is one of the most convoluted, condescending perspectives that you'll ever see of the Hebrew Scriptures. Like I said, not only I, but my entire staff, all of us, including Don Bartlett, who has left us a year ago, we hold the Hebrew Scriptures in the highest regard. And I don't get it, folks. This is where Mikey gets off the train. I can't go with you on this lambasting and disgracing the Scriptures. I can't go there. I've tried. I really have tried to go there with you, but I can't go there with you. So as I went back to this and read this in context, you see, this is Jesus talking about his own work. So these are prophecies about Jesus, and he said he came to reveal the day of the Lord. And the day of the Lord contained two things: the vengeance of our God and to comfort all that mourn. So with that in context, we look back at he hath sent me to bind up the brokenhearted. Now, we're only going to go into that one verse because we don't have time to do all of this, but I am committed to going through this entire chapter, but we're going to have a little bit more help just a little bit later on, and that's what I'm excited about in particular tonight. I'll be sharing a little bit with you at the end of this. So what does it mean to bind up the brokenhearted? So the term bind up is a very interesting Hebrew word, and you've used it, I promise you, you've used this Hebrew word. It's called kibosh. How many of you have heard somebody say, boy, Daddy put the kibosh on that. So-and-so was planning on doing this or that, but boy, they put the kibosh on that. So, and Jackie, I know you've used that term, haven't you? And my brother's on there. I remember my dad using it. We were from East Tennessee, and here we didn't know. I had no clue we were using a very old Hebrew term called kibosh. Now, it meant almost exactly the way we were using it. When you told somebody you're going to put the kibosh on that, it didn't mean that you were going to slow it down, you were going to paint it up or transform it. You were putting an end to it. You were bringing a full stop to something that was never going to happen again. Sounds like the gospel to me. But you say, Mike, but there are brokenhearted people everywhere. But let me tell you what they are not brokenhearted about, unless they've been taught wrong. They're not brokenhearted about their relationship with God. They're not brokenhearted because they've disappointed God. They're not brokenhearted because they think that because God has gotten angry with them. They're not brokenhearted because of a sudden, intense dread of the judgment and the anger and the wrath of God, which was what one of the reasons for sounding the trumpet was. One of the reasons that the Jewish people sounded the trumpet was, and this one was a long, loud, single blast. And if there was no interruptions in it, it meant the judgment of God is coming. That's what it meant. Now, I know, you guys. I know you want everybody to forget the Hebrew Scriptures. We're not going to forget the Hebrew Scriptures. And in the long run, all of you that have abandoned the Hebrew Scriptures, you're going to be very disappointed. Because what you've done is come up with your own form of spirituality apart from the Scriptures. Oh, well, we can be spiritual without the Scriptures. Yeah, you sure can. And it gets a little weird, to tell you the truth. It just gets a little weird. In fact, sometimes it gets more than just a little bit weird. When it gets so weird that you start saying that Moses got it wrong, that Elijah, that Isaiah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah all got it wrong. And you start saying that these were the perspectives of people, not the opinion of God, you haven't read the Scriptures. You do not know the Hebrew Scriptures at all. And these aren't something that got mistranslated time after time after time after time. If you knew the history of the Hebrew Scriptures, which you're going to learn, far beyond what I can tell you. If you knew the history of the Hebrew Scriptures, you would know that they were meticulously passed down verbally. People spent their whole lives learning to repeat the Scriptures until they finally went into a written form. And yes, there's mistranslations in this. You can be guaranteed of it. But the Hebrew it has been the same for thousands of years, folks. And so when people try to drag you off to disqualify the Hebrew Scriptures because, oh my God, it's been translated so many times and it's just gone from it, that's not true. That's just not true at all. These were highly watched over in a culture where these words from God through the prophets were very valuable. And I'm looking to the day, well, doesn't have to come back to us because we still have a great value and respect for the Hebrew Scriptures. But there's many that don't. And it's going to be to their own dismay because they're building spiritual perceptions that have nothing to do with the understanding of Scripture, which Jesus said was all about Him. Can I remind you of that again? That Jesus said that the Scriptures were all about Him and that we should go to the Scriptures. Not that we should go back and undermine the scriptures, but he said the scriptures were all about him. I accept that. It's like, why is that such a big deal? Because there's people who've developed a theory of their own, and they keep repeating it. And if you keep saying it over and over, as they say, eventually people believe you simply by repetition. But we're not letting that pass, because the Hebrew scriptures are valuable, and they do have incredible insights about the gospel in them. So when it says that Jesus came to put the kibosh on the brokenhearted, now what does that mean? How do you put the kibosh on being brokenhearted? You have to read in context. If you go back to Isaiah and you start reading in the 50s and the 60s and 70s, God, if you go back to Isaiah 1 through 39, you'll see how many times they were under the anger or the wrath or the judgment of God. And that speaks of how broken the people were under this, not their perception of it, how broken they were under this. But what Jesus came to heal was the effects of an angry God on a people. And this is what the prophet Isaiah said that Jesus was coming to do, was to put the kibosh on ever being brokenhearted ever again. But you say, and I know that people will say, but Michael, I've been brokenhearted. Yeah, me too. And sometimes in recent past, I've experienced being brokenhearted about something. But let me tell you something I'm never brokenhearted about. Can't be brokenhearted about. And that is because of the anger or wrath or judgment of God. Because when Jesus got ready to go to the cross, he said, I'm taking all judgment upon me. And wow, once that hit me, that gospel of peace, the gospel of peace is the understanding that Jesus put the kibosh on the brokenhearted. That's what that means. Jesus came and put the kibosh, and the word broken is shabar, and the word heart is leb. So if you're going to put a title on this tonight, it's going to be that Jesus put the kibosh on the shabar leb. Now, I think that's marvelous news, that Jesus put the kibosh on the shabar leb. Now, I sound kind of silly sitting here trying to speak Hebrew, trying to tell you something about Hebrew that, hope it's right. But something's happened in the gospel revolution and Mike Williams Ministries that I'm very happy to announce to you tonight. And that is that we're bringing on staff Eli Ben Yaun. And that's as Jewish of a name as I've ever heard in my life. I'm sure that I will eventually be able to pronounce it correctly. But Eli is coming on staff as a Hebrew scholar and is going to be helping us work through all of these things like what I'm stumbling through right now. We're not going to have to stumble through this anymore, my dear friends. This has been a lifelong dream of mine, to have someone connected with the ministry who was an expert in Hebrew text. Now, I can't tell you that this man has ever darkened the doors of a church. Kind of hope he hasn't. But we'll learn more about him as we go. He's only in his 30s. He is seems to be an absolutely wonderful young man, and his credentials are impeccable. And we'll be telling you a little bit more about that later. But absolutely, I had to call and tell somebody after I found out that this was actually going to take place. And I had to talk it out because I couldn't say it without crying. I could not say this without breaking down into tears. And so I am saving you from having to go through that. So I got that part of this out. And folks, this is a really wonderful day in the gospel revolution. And we've made a commitment to you that we would understand the scriptures. And to understand the scriptures, we need someone who is an expert in Hebrew text. And we've got it. We'll be telling you more about this coming up. I hope that you now understand that Jesus put the kibosh on the shabar leb. I love it. It's so wonderful to find out the term that was used even here in the hills of Tennessee, that it was a Hebrew word and it meant something. And we kind of used it correctly. Jesus put the kibosh on anybody ever being broken pertaining to anything about their relationship with God. Altar calls in churches around the world are fake and phony, as my ministry was healing the brokenhearted. It helped people, but there was nothing gospel about it. There's nothing gospel about altar calls to get you to come up and mend your relationship with God and repair and bind up your relationship with God. Heal your relationship with God. Jesus did all that. Yeah, we're pretty radical about Jesus around here. We're radical about Jesus, and we're radical about the scriptures. Are you going to hang in there with us? We're going to learn some wonderful things. Love you guys. I've gone over time. You're used to that. Good night.